This is Where We Live on Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Connecticut has an established shellfish industry, but some ocean farmers in our state have been growing and harvesting another crop, a type of seaweed called kelp, sugar kelp to be exact. Coming up, we hear from a local restaurant that supports sustainable fishing and farming. David Standridge is executive chef at Shipwright's Daughter in Mystic, where sugar kelp is on the menu in some innovative ways. We talk to him later. And we hear from one of the few kelp farmers in our state. Suzie Flores and her husband own Stonington Kelp Company, the largest commercial seaweed farm in Connecticut. First, kelp can be eaten, but it also improves ocean health, which in turn helps shellfish and other aquatic animals. Joining us now with more on Zoom, Anoushka Concepcion, who's an extension specialist with the Connecticut Sea Grant and UConn Extension Program. Her work is focused on seaweed aquaculture and processing and the direct marketing of shellfish. Anoushka, welcome to our show.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Now, you can join as well if you have a question about kelp farming in our state, 888-720-9677. That's 888-720-WNPR. Share a comment on our Facebook page or find us on Twitter at Where We Live. Anoushka, we're definitely going to learn more about kelp farming and the benefits. But when I talk about the benefits, there's something called regenerative ocean farming. Tell us about this approach and how it's being applied in our state.
So regenerative ocean farming is a concept based on a scientific model called integrated multi-trophic aquaculture. It was first developed in Asia decades ago. And what that means is it's the process of cultivating or growing organisms at different trophic levels. So that means they fit in the food chain at different levels. So for example, in Asia, they cultivate fish. We don't do that here in the US, but they cultivate fish out in the open water. But because fish can produce a lot of waste, what they are doing is cultivating organisms at lower trophic levels, such as sea cucumbers. Sea cucumbers can remove waste, but then further to remove additional components that are added into the water, they cultivate shellfish, so oysters or mussels, and then another layer of macroalgae such as sugar kelp. And so the idea is that you're not only cultivating organisms that can be used as food, because it can all be harvested for food or sold as food, all the organisms in the IMTA system, but essentially you're removing the nutrients that you're adding into the environment in that system. And so that's really the idea behind regenerative farming, is coming from that IMTA model.
When you mentioned Asia and we think about seaweed, when we think about kelp or a type of seaweed being grown and harvested here, where did this idea come from? And when we talk about it benefiting the state economy, is it still an early industry in our state?
It is an early industry, although we have been cultivating sugar kelp at a very small scale for almost 10 years now. And the idea came from really a way to diversify in the seafood that we produce. As you'd mentioned before, our primary seafood production is shellfish, so oysters and clams. But really, those are just two organisms. So incorporating another organism that is just as extractive, such as sugar kelp, it's a native species. It's found locally. It's native to our waterways. It's also a nutritious species, and it's pretty good. It's delicious. And so it just sort of made sense to enable seafood producers to be able to produce more than one crop on the sites that they already have.
When we think about what humans are doing to the world's oceans, the impact of carbon dioxide and other pollutants because of fertilizer and whatnot, so how does kelp help the ocean health?
So because it's a macroalgae, it's not a plant, it's a macroalgae, but it extracts nutrients right from the water column. And so that's what helps it grow. So the nutrients that we put, or that's already available in the water column, essentially act as fertilizer. It is a photosynthetic organism. So not only does it utilize the quote unquote fertilizer or nutrients in the water, it's also photosynthesizing with sunlight. And so really it's just a natural fit to seafood production, but also a great way to clean up coastal waterways.
You mentioned it's a great fit and natural when we think about production, but what's the commercial infrastructure look like, considering we've already have the shellfish industry here?
Yeah, so really we don't have a lot of infrastructure for processing and stabilization. And really, with seaweed, it has a very short shelf life because it's mostly made of water. And so the shelf life, meaning it can start to degrade very quickly if it's not put in a form or stored appropriately so that product quality can be maintained. The reason why we don't have a lot of infrastructure, it's because our seafood production, again, is based around shellfish, and shellfish is sold whole and live. And so we're not processing as much of our oysters and clams as we would other types of seafood. And so that's really the challenge that farmers like Suzie and others in Connecticut are trying to address right now.
And how can Connecticut Sea Grant help with this process? I know that the state will issue particular producer licenses, and so tell us about some of the the numbers of people that are licensed and some of the barriers to get them more involved in the kelp growing and harvesting.
Yeah, that's a great question. So Connecticut Sea Grant has been, involved in seaweed farming and aquaculture for decades. And so really what we do is we respond to what our stakeholders need. And at the very beginning of my career back in 2011, what was lacking was food safety guidance. And we're really one of the only states in the country that has very set food safety guidance, ensuring that the seaweed that we produce and sell is safe for human consumption. And Suzie can attest to that. She has to go through this testing every year. And then she gets issued a seaweed producer license, which enables her to sell her crop. So some of the other challenges that we have really are barriers, or the barriers we have include the infrastructure, safe storage, but also providing seaweed or increasing shelf life so that sugar kelp can be available year round. So that's one of the challenges that, again, supporting Suzie, working with chefs, that Connecticut Sea Grant is just really trying to help address what we can through providing funding, participating in projects to make sure that we do what we can to help move this industry forward.
You're hearing Anoushka Concepcion here on Where We Live. She's an extension specialist with the Connecticut Sea Grant and UConn Extension Program. Her work focusing on seaweed aquaculture and processing, also the direct marketing of shellfish. She mentioned Suzie, so joining us now on Zoom is one of the owners of the largest commercial seaweed farm in the state, Suzie Flores, a kelp farmer, owner of Stonington Kelp Company. That's a regenerative ocean farm. Suzie, welcome to our show.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm really grateful to be here.
So I understand you started, you and your husband, back in 2017. How did you get interested in sugar kelp?
My husband and I, we purchased a marina that was essentially slipping into the water. And so we had this opportunity as we were rehabilitating the marina to have a boat in the water year round. In looking for, reasons to justify, being on the water year round, we kind of came across this, the concept of kelp farming. Originally, we wanted to do it just to grow food for our family. And then the more we looked into it, the more we realized that was not a possibility. However, there was this kind of emerging potential for this to be an economically viable revenue stream for our family. So we figured, why not go for it? All of the positive environmental impacts that Anoushka touched on before was definitely a large driving force for us to kind of move forward with it. But it really is truly it was an opportunity to do something that was really satisfying and very peaceful and just really enjoyable. My husband and I are both water people. We find a lot of peace and solace by being on and around the water.
What's a typical day for you harvesting kelp in the season that it's grown?
Yeah, so the key word there is in the season. It's a seasonal crop. We outplant in the winter. We tend the farm all winter long over, December, January, February into March. And then we start harvesting after our test results come back and the seaweed is cleared by the state. We start harvesting at the end of March, beginning of April. So in each of those months, the experience that we have is pretty different. During the harvest season, it's a lot of sales, to be honest. It's sales and marketing, trying to entice chefs to give this amazing native crop a try on their menus, trying to educate the public about all of the benefits, both health and environmental, that it can have, and trying to get people really excited about eating more seaweed, locally cultivated seaweed.
Anoushka explained to us about regenerative ocean farming. That was a big draw for you and your husband to move on to kelp farming.
Yeah, it was. It was really important for us to be doing something that we felt was responsible. We have 3 children, and for me, I think about what legacy I'm leaving behind for them and for their kids, and so this seemed like something that was in line with the type of life that we want to leave and the type of example that we wanted to set. And we were very lucky to be in a state where there are a lot of people who are also very interested in this, a lot of scientists that have been studying this whole process. They've been partnering with regulators who are interested in trying to make this economy happen. And just fishermen out there who wanted to also give this a go and see if they could turn this into or create a model that made sense for other people to kind of follow. And that's essentially what we did. We're following a model that other people have already set up, and we just kind of put our own spin on it.
We talked about the short growing season, and so this is a cold water species. We know the water is warming, so I'm wondering how that's impacting your kelp farming.
It definitely has an impact. And, I've only been farming for 6 years, and I've already seen some anecdotal changes in the way the environment is responding to climate change. The most obvious impact is that it shortens our season. So I like to outplant around Thanksgiving, and we usually harvest until middle, end of May. As the water is warm, that kind of abbreviates the season on both ends. So that's, that presents new challenges for us to try to overcome.
And what about some of the more strong storms we've had in recent years? I feel like our state's getting windier. Suzie, how does that impact the work you're doing on the water?
I also feel like our state's getting windier. It impacts it tremendously. We're riding out our site in particular. Now, every site is going to be different. It's going to have its own, factors that make the site, potentially more dangerous. We're out there. We're not out in the open ocean, but we're kind of in the middle of the Fisher's Island Sound. We have a very strong current that rips through our site. So when you are riding your boat out and you're anchoring into a mooring that is holding the farm in place, and the wind is blowing in the wrong direction or in the opposite direction of that you need it to be blowing, you have the current going in a direction that isn't helpful for whatever you're trying to do while you're out on the farm. It can be really dangerous. You run the risk of tangling your prop in your own gear. You run the risk of swamping your boat. And the water, as we mentioned, it's cold, it's winter. There's really not anybody out recreationally on the water. We happen to be located in Stonington, Connecticut, where the last commercial fishing docks are. So there are fishermen that we see coming and going from those docks, but it is it can be really tricky. And so that wind will, essentially keep us off the farm. It also puts a lot of wear and tear on our gear, which is, aside from being extremely expensive, we want to make sure that holds as a safety issue for the rest of the people that are in our area. So it can be problematic. It requires us to think things through a little bit more thoroughly than I think we did the first year we put our farm out.
You're hearing Suzie Flores here on Where We Live. She's one of the few kelp farmers in our state. She and her husband own Stonington Kelp Company, a regenerative ocean farm, the largest commercial seaweed farm in the state. Suzie, I had asked Anoushka earlier about some of the challenges to grow this industry. What would you like to see from the state and others to help promote seaweed farming in our state, to help people with that investment to get going?
I think I feel very fortunate to be doing this where I am doing this. I think the state of Connecticut has been very supportive of the farm, very supportive of the industry, and very responsive to the requests that I have put forward, things that I'm asking for. So I just want to start out there that I feel like we're in a really wonderful position. One of the biggest challenges that I find is just the general education about to the public about what it is that we're doing. We're growing a food that is wildly sustainable from a perspective of its production, and it also is very, very healthy. And it's, just trying to get people to wrap their heads around this concept that, you can eat this native sugar kelp and it can actually be delicious. It's kind of bizarre that that's not something that's endemic to New England, since it is a resource that we have. So trying to get people excited about eating it would help us kind of create a larger market. And then ultimately, I would love to see more farmers. I am, as you mentioned, one of the few farmers in this area. We have a small cooperative where the other Connecticut farmers, as well as a few farmers in Rhode Island, work together to try to share our sales channels. So, if there's a big order that perhaps I can't fulfill, I want to be able to lean on other farmers and kind of share the wealth so that we all can thrive in this space. And, I think that'll, start to help other things, that'll grow perhaps the desire to invest in more infrastructure. It'll, just bring more attention to this region in general. And it's a really cool way to kind of set up a new working waterfront economy, in my opinion. So I think that's what I would like to see, is just more groundswell from people who are asking restaurants to carry it, who want to see it, in their local markets, and who are willing to try to cook with it at home.
We'll be hearing from a local executive chef about a restaurant that's helping support sustainable farming. First, we're hearing from Suzie Flores, a kelp farmer and owner of Stonington Kelp Company, as we learn about regenerative ocean farming in our state. Also with us on Zoom, Anoushka Concepcion, who's an extension specialist with the Connecticut Sea Grant and UConn Extension Program. After the break, we're going to learn what it would take to encourage more regenerative ocean farming in our state. And by the way, how does it taste? You can join us, 888-720-9677. That's 888-720-WNPR. Or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live on Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. The National Marine Fisheries Service says seaweed farming is the fastest growing aquaculture in the U.S. Growing and harvesting seaweed like kelp can help fishermen and ocean farmers diversify their operations and be more efficient, utilizing the entire water column for crops harvested at different times. Kelp farming is also regenerative, helping to revive ocean ecosystems. Now, there are farms in places like Washington State, Alaska, and here in Connecticut. My guest, Suzie Flores, is a kelp farmer and owner of the largest commercial seaweed farm in our state, Stonington Kelp Company. And also with us, Anoushka Concepcion, who's an extension specialist with the Connecticut Sea Grant and UConn Extension Program. If you have a question about kelp farming, our number 888-720-9677. That's 888-720-WNPR, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. Suzie, I understand you have a partnership with Green Wave, which is a nonprofit really here to help with regenerative ocean farming. Tell us about it.
Absolutely. So in the beginning of my my Google deep dive into seaweed farming back in 2016, I came across a UConn instructor, Dr. Charlie Yarish, who I reached out to him privately, and he said, you need to talk to the people at Green Wave. So I reached out to them as well. Green Wave is a nonprofit based in New Haven, Connecticut, that is essentially set up to help aspiring kelp farmers like my husband and I at the time get going. So they helped us through, they gave us guidance through the permitting process. They basically told us the people who we needed to reach out to. In fact, Anoushka was one of the people they put us in touch with right away. They provided some schematics for examples of a safe farm that could be set up in the state of Connecticut. They helped me learn how to tie knots. I sat on a boat with Bren while he showed me how to tie a bowline knot, which I did not know because I was not a boat person before I started the seaweed farm. So they were tremendously helpful. And in fact, if there are any aspiring seaweed farmers out there, they just launched this fabulous program on their website. It's the Farmer Hub, where you can go and watch videos that kind of give you a tutorial of how to set up a farm. They give you software that allows you to help with site selection, business plan, modeling. It's really a whole wealth of information. And it's one of those things that I really wish I had in the beginning. It would have saved me a lot of time, probably saved them a lot of time from me just emailing them and calling them. So I would highly recommend that, as well as the Seaweed Hub, which also is a big wealth of resources for any aspiring farmers, especially those in Connecticut, Rhode Island, or New York.
You mentioned Bren. That's Bren Smith, co-founder of Green Wave. Again, this nonprofit operating out of Connecticut, helping support regenerative ocean farmers. That farming hub that you mentioned, a regenerative ocean farming hub, a seed-to-sale resource to help provide training and tools to a community of kelp farmers nationwide. Has it been difficult to stay profitable, Suzie? When you were talking earlier about some of the challenges when it comes to the season being shorter or the type of weather that we have that can tangle up your boats.
Yeah, it is difficult. It's difficult for any small business, I think, to get started up, especially small businesses that have a business model that's already essentially established in a market that already exists. So this is particularly challenging, but because of that, it's particularly fun. I mentioned before, this is not the only thing that we rely on to feed our family. Mm-hmm. So my husband and I own and operate a marina. We also have another water-based business servicing moorings in our area. So this is just a piece of the puzzle. And I think that that might not be the approach that everybody takes, but a lot of the smaller farmers, I think, need to approach it with the understanding that this is a way to kind of diversify your whole portfolio, if you will. It's not necessarily you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket, so to speak. I think that because the industry is so new, though, it does provide a lot of opportunity, and there's always some sort of amazing idea that we can kind of noodle on and think about whether or not this will be another potential way to utilize kelp. Kelp isn't just for food. We grow it primarily for food, but there's a lot of other applications. It can be used as a bioplastic. It's being looked into for biofuels. It also is a wonderful soil amendment as well. So, and I mean, that's just to name a few. So there's a lot of other ways that you can leverage this awesome local crop.
I mentioned Anoushka Concepcion is with us from Connecticut Sea Grant. When we think about what Connecticut has going for it in terms of its sugar kelp grown and harvested here, I understand that you've done a lot of work around food safety for kelp farmers and sales and how that can be leveraged compared to some other states that kelp farm. Anoushka.
Yeah, so when we first started investigating food safety, it was really a need because in Connecticut, all aquaculture producers have to operate under a food safety plan called a HACCP plan. And at the time, we didn't really understand what the potential food safety hazards, if there were food safety hazards associated with sugar kelp. And so that led a 6 to 7 year investigation into what potential food safety hazards were and how we go about minimizing those hazards so we can maintain food safety, especially with the kelp that we're producing. And this is still an ongoing effort, a partnership with the Connecticut Department of Agriculture's Bureau of Aquaculture. And really, they're the lead regulatory authority for not just permitting, but also food safety of our seafood products in the state of Connecticut. And so what we did was partnered with farmers, deploying seaweed out into the environment, collecting samples. And so now we were able to produce a food safety guidance document where seaweed producers can produce a food safety plan that's that's approved by the state of Connecticut. And so really, that's what makes, I think, our Connecticut seafood products, especially our sugar kelp, really, really unique and special. It's something that many other states don't have. And I think that's really exciting because not only can Suzie with 100% say, my seaweed is safe to eat, she can also hold up her seaweed producer license and say it's safe because the state of Connecticut has tested it and approved it. And so I think that Connecticut has an advantage by having those guidelines in place that really makes us competitive with other states and product that we import from overseas.
Suzie, Flores, prior to you and your husband starting to farm kelp, I understand you had a background in market development. You're an executive. So you've been able to leverage that skill set, thinking about how food education is also an important part of this?
Yeah, oddly, that's actually come into play a lot. This is a new and emerging market. So my experience working on developing new marketplaces at an ed tech company really came in very handy. A lot of the frameworks and just kind of the habits that I had acquired. So I'm really grateful for that. I didn't expect to be doing so many spreadsheets as a farmer, but it is what it is.
Again, you can join us 888-720-9677 if you have a question about kelp farming in our state. Anoushka, earlier Suzie was talking about, this almost a collaborative, how these kelp farmers are helping each other. And, now that New York State is just signed, their governor signed a kelp bill into law, how this all works regionally. Can you explain that for us?
So every state is going to be different in with the agencies involved with permitting, but also with public health and ensuring public health. But really what we're doing regionally and even nationally is working together with one another and sharing ideas, really sharing experiences, what worked for us, what didn't work, what we should have done. So because seaweed farming is an emerging industry, we're really at a great point where we can hopefully prevent some of the mistakes made with other commodities and other industries. And so what we do is we're working closely with our colleagues on the New York side to learn what they're doing, and they're learning from our mistakes, and they are also developing food safety guidance. And so it's just part of that collaborative effort through the Sea Grant program. We're a national program, and there's 34 Sea Grant programs, across the country, and also at the research side as well. A lot of the researchers also work together and collaborate on projects. So this is really a group effort, and it's really exciting to see all of these folks, all these different stakeholder groups coming together with regulators, talking with other regulators from other states, and we're really coming up with a plan on how we can move seaweed farming forward to make it commercially viable for everyone. So it's a very exciting time. The National Seaweed Hub that Suzie mentioned is also part of this effort that's really facilitating a lot of these conversations, and that's a Sea Grant-led effort.
That's Anoushka Concepcion here on Where We Live, an extension specialist with the Connecticut Sea Grant and UConn Extension Program. Also with us, Suzie Flores, a kelp farmer and owner of Stonington Kelp Company, a regenerative ocean farm, the largest commercial seaweed farm in our state. After the break, we'll learn how local restaurants are helping support sustainable fishing and farming. First, today is the last day of Connecticut Public's end of the fiscal year drive. Support the station and all of its programming, including Where We Live, with a pledge. Here are two of my colleagues to tell you more. This is Where We Live on Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. We've been learning about kelp farming in our state. Local restaurants can help support sustainable fishing and farming. David Standridge is executive chef at Shipwright's Daughter in Mystic, where Connecticut sugar kelp is on the menu in some innovative ways. He joins us now on Zoom. David, welcome to our show.
Thanks so much for having me on. I'm excited.
First up, the mission of Shipwright's Daughter, how kelp fits in, David?
When I moved here to open this restaurant, I just wanted to get involved in the community and just find ways to help and be supportive. And one of the first things I looked at is, how are we producing our food locally? And so I discovered the local fishing fleet, and I pretty quickly stumbled upon Suzie and her kelp farm. And so our mentality is we just want to try to use local products and help local producers as much as possible get into the marketplace.
When we think about how fishing has changed in our state, are you having conversations with local fishermen about their catch and how that's changing and how you're able to incorporate something like kelp?
Yeah, I mean, it's environmentally things are changing very quickly. The lobsters are kind of going away, and different fish species are becoming either more scarce or more populous depending on the effects of the water temperature changes. So it's always in flux. And kelp has kind of become a big part of what we do for a lot of reasons. One, it's totally delicious, which is a great product on the plate. And it also comes at a really great time for us in the early spring when there's no other vegetables locally produced. So it fills a great gap for us on the menu.
Yeah, Suzie Flores says it's delicious as well. So describe the taste for us and how are you using kelp on your menu?
We use it in so many different ways. The flavor profile is it's kind of got a briny, umami quality. It's vegetative. It kind of depends where the kelp is from. I mean, Suzie's kelp is from kind of out near Fisher's Island, and it tastes to me almost exactly like Fisher's Island oysters. Has a very clean, briny crispness to it and sweetness. And it's really easy to put on the plate because you can eat it. Many times I've been out on the boat with Suzie and just eat it right out of the water. It's delicious just on its own. But we use it in everything from desserts, where we make a candied kelp or a kelp caramel, to entree preparations where we've wrapped fish in it and almost kind of substituted it for like how you would have wrapped something in bacon, or smoked the kelp and then wrap a fish or pork in it. I use it as kind of a crispy wrapper. I deep fry it and top it as a crispy thing. It goes in pastas, soups, all kinds of different sauces. It's very versatile.
Okay, I think you've sold me on sugar kelp in Connecticut. Ida has a question from New Britain. Ida, what's your question for David Standridge?
Oh, my question had to do with well, of course, you sort of answered it just now. Thank you for having me on. Do you think it'll ever come that we'll have the kelp in a market where somebody like me can buy it? And if we do buy it, well, from what you're saying, I should consider something like that in a sauce or something, not like a vegetable, right?
David?
Not necessarily. I mean, I think Suzie probably have more information on whether or not you'll be able to see it in the market soon, but I love it just as a salad. I mean, if you ever had seaweed salad at maybe a sushi restaurant, you can just add it to your salads. It's a great vegetable additive. I do use it in sauces, but it's great also just thrown into pasta. You can definitely use it as a vegetable.
Okay. Right. So that sounds interesting. And then that would be nice. I would make a suggestion for people who are marketing this, that they market to more than just the fishermen out there. I mean, we're interested, at least I'm interested, and many people must be interested in increasing their ability to buy fish. Fish is not very available in New Britain or Hartford and so forth. You only see it in grocery stores, and that's a small area relative to the big area where there's a lot of meat.
Thank you. Thank you, Ida, for your comments and questions. Suzie Flores, Ida wanted to know, could she pick it up as just a regular consumer at a local market near her? What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, it's a wonderful question. We're trying to get into as many places as we possibly can, but as I'm learning more and more about how the food systems work and the supply chains work for food, it's a little bit more complicated, and I'm not an expert. I can't really speak to it, but in this instance, it's a matter of getting distributors interested. So people who distribute seafood across the state of Connecticut. And so we're knocking on some doors and we're trying hard to sell them on the idea of carrying kelp. So the more people like Ida out there can ask their local markets to carry this product, the better chance I have of, getting somebody to say yes to me when I'm, begging them to put kelp on their list.
That's, again, Suzie Flores, a kelp farmer and owner of Stonington Kelp Company. Anoushka, Concepcion, we've heard David Standridge with Shipwright's daughter talking about these different ways to use Connecticut sugar kelp. Would you describe it as a delicacy?
I think it is. But really, and it's just such a natural, wholesome, local food. And as David mentioned, just eating it right out of the water, it's a taste and has a texture that I haven't had in any other form. And so it's just such an underrated food source that, just, again, asking for it, having, going to your seafood market and just saying, I heard about Connecticut kelp. Where can I get some? And mentioning that there's farmers in Connecticut that's producing this resource. I think it's just really, again, it's underrated. And I think that, the more folks that have access to sugar kelp, Suzie's doing her best and David's doing an amazing job promoting this local crop. It's just, again, coming down to just requesting it. More requests increases orders and then increases the number of farmers. And so it's just, again, it works hand in hand.
David Standridge, again, is executive chef at the Shipwright's Daughter and Mystic. So, David, when you have this on one of your patrons' plates, what are their questions? Do they ask about if it's nutritious? And, how do you, I guess, in the sense, make this more appealing to people so that they do ask for it next time?
I think it's like this with a lot of products that are new and we want to serve. If you make it delicious and you just kind of put it in front of people, it's pretty easy sell. We haven't really had, I was very surprised actually with sugar kelp that I had no issue getting people to try it. It was just simple and easy. But there are kind of like some tricks we have. Like I actually use it in desserts. I feel like people are a little more apt to experiment with a dessert rather than with their main course. So we kind of throw it in there. And then a lot of times I just don't tell people it's on the, it's in what they're eating. It's just kind of there and it's hiding. And then when they ask why is this so good? That's a great lead in to say, well, that's because there's kelp in there. And then they can kind of become more comfortable with it.
Earlier, I talked with you, David, about how the fishing industry is changing in current terms of certain fish that may not be as readily available. When we think about do you talk with other fishermen about some of the less popular fin fish that's also ending up on your menu?
Yeah, it's a huge part of what I've been trying to do since we came here is try to get more underutilized species in restaurants and just getting more fishermen to keep them and to sell them. It's really interesting. There's a ton of bycatch, obviously, that a lot of people are aware of, and wonderful species of fish that are delicious and that are basically being wasted right now. And so it's been kind of challenging, but I've started to make some headway in getting things like sea robin and skate and dogfish and just some lesser known species that are quite populous that can take some of the pressure off of the really popular fish that everybody likes, like, cod and haddock and fluke. Yeah, there's so much of it out there and we're happy to try to get it.
Do people have an appetite for mackerel? I remember trying that at Prince Edward Island, and it's pretty tasty.
Mackerel's amazing, and the one I really is kind of my poster child is sea robin, because a lot of people have caught it. It's kind of a really weird looking fish, but it's always just been tagged as this quote unquote garbage fish that you just either throw back or you're trying to fish for something else and you always end up catching it. But it's actually one of my favorite fish. It's meaty and flaky and delicious. So we're trying to get it out there.
Before we run out of time, Anoushka Concepcion with Connecticut Sea Grant. Just a couple of minutes left, but we started the conversation talking about Connecticut's shellfish industry. And when we think about the benefits to, say, our oysters, how kelp farming could help them, is it feasible or practical when we think about, the commercial market to help enhance oyster growth?
So that's a great question, and thank you for bringing it up. A lot of research right now is underway just to prove that. And so the results so far, preliminary results look promising, that cultivating sugar kelp along with different species of shellfish can in fact help promote growth of shellfish and other benefits to shellfish. So stay tuned. This research is happening all across the country, but still can't give you a definitive yes or no that this is a magic formula.
Suzie Flores is still with us again. She's a kelp farmer, owner of Stonington Kelp Company. For people who are wondering about the nutrition of Connecticut sugar kelp, what can you tell them?
We know that it's high in iron, high in calcium. It's high in omega-3s. A lot of the things that make fish so healthy for us to eat are because fish eat the algae that's in the sea. So it's you're kind of cutting out the middleman when you go right to the kelp.
Again, that's Suzie Flores. Thank you so much for your time on the show, owner of Stonington Kelp Company. We appreciate it. It was also a pleasure to hear from David Standridge, executive chef at the Shipwright's Daughter and Mystic. David, thank you.
Thank you for having me. And
Anoushka Concepcion, doing great work with Connecticut Sea Grant and the UConn Extension Program. Anoushka, thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a great day.
I'm Lucy Nalpathanchil. Today's show is produced by Katie Pellico. Coming up on Monday, we're going to talk about lifeguarding. We know it's not just a summer job, it's serious life-saving work. And there's a lifeguard shortage, how it impacts our residents, and data show that drownings are on the rise. We hope you join us for that conversation. Now, before you head off to the rest of your day, it's Connecticut Public's End of the Fiscal Year campaign. Where We Live talks about a lot of different topics. We ask listeners to join in, and we talk to Connecticut residents from all over our state. If you appreciate this type of programming, as well as everything else Connecticut Public provides, please support us now. Here's how.